Three, fuck. 3, 2, 1. Hey guys, welcome back to Cult of Film. Today marks, I think, the first episode in a series of films that I want to cover with regard to Dune, the sci-fi drama classic. Just what an amazing novel, what an amazing series of novels. And obviously, us being Cult of Film, I want to sort of discuss Dune's place in cinema because there's now a track record of several films realized and at least one that hasn't been. And that's the one I want to discuss today. I'm in the process of rereading the original novel that I haven't read in a really long time. I'm a huge fan of the 1984 David Lynch film, and I have just recently finished watching Dune Part 2, which really blew me away. I'm sorry it took me so long to get to that film, but it's absolutely beautiful, a real masterwork. And I'm so glad to see that Hollywood is still making such sort of sweeping sci-fi epics. And again, Denis Villeneuve, who really put my uh, anxieties to rest with Blade Runner 2049, as Blade Runner is probably my favorite film of all time, was really concerned when the sequel came out, where that was going to fall. And he knocked it out of the park. I know it wasn't a huge box office hit, but he absolutely nailed it there. And he nailed it again with these first two installments of Dune. And I think this next one is the third, I think will be the last for the trilogy. Anyways, wanted to talk today about the unrealized Dune film, which is Alejandro Jodorowsky's Dune, which would have dropped in the 70s. There's a really, really great documentary that's airing on Max, formerly HBO Max, streaming called Jodorowsky's Dune. And watching this documentary, I'm so sad that he didn't get a chance to realize his vision. Jodorowsky, I think, is in his 90s now and is still, he still goes and talks. He seems to have a real strong enthusiasm for film and for people who love film and young filmmakers. He just keeps going. He is a really interesting, for those of you that aren't familiar with Jodorowsky, he is a Chilean filmmaker and a surrealist filmmaker. He did films. The first thing I ever saw from him was Santa Sangre, which was actually an English language film, but he's probably better known for El Topo, which is a sort of surrealist Western, and another film called The Holy Mountain, which is sort of a surrealist, sort of psychedelic, quasi-philosophical film. His movies are hard to categorize. To me, he is the Salvador Dali of film and of filmmakers. Sometimes I get frustrated with him because his stuff can be so out there. But the more I watch his stuff and the more I watch interviews with him, I do see sort of the method to his madness. And he really would have been an interesting choice to do Dune when he wanted to do it in the 70s. In the 70s, you're coming out of the 60s and you're sort of coming out of that psychedelic era of the late 60s into sort of like the, what do they call that? The me generation, I think, of the 70s. That might not be correct. Anyway, what is so great about this documentary and the story of Jodorowsky's Dune, sadly unrealized, is just the level of detail and vision that he had for making the story into a film. He had the likes of Moebius, the great French comic illustrator Moebius, who passed away some years ago, do all of the storyboards. He had sci-fi illustrator Chris Foss of the UK, who was very well known for doing, covers to like Asimov and different sci-fi novels in the 70s, just doing a lot of really cool sci-fi and fantasy illustrations of the era. He even went so far as to, he had H.R. Giger, the man who designed the xenomorph from Alien. He had him on board designing the, I don't know, is it the Harkonnen, portion of the Dune universe for his film. So, the Harkonnen Palace, um, their 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 planet, their technology. It would have been Giger that designed all of that, and some of the uh, sketches and things that they, even fully realized portraits that Giger did for the Harkonnens were just beautiful. And you look at this, you're like, man, what could have been? Meanwhile, again, he had people like Foss and Mobius doing designs for the House Atreides and Arrakis, and just really brilliant designs and vision. Highly recommend looking up all of those artists and then typing in Dune and seeing what they produced. But another thing that was quite impressive about Jodorowsky's vision was what he had planned with regard to the cast of Dune. Those of you that enjoy, have seen the '84 movie, have seen the recent two new movies. Um, all of those films, um, spectacular casts. In Jodorowsky's Dune would have been no different. He had David Carradine tapped to play Duke Leto. Duke Leto. His son would have, that is Jodorowsky's son Brontis, would have played young um, Paul. But what's fun is he gets into Fade, was it Fade Rutha? Fade Raltha would have been played by Mick Jagger. The Emperor of the known universe, Shaddam IV, would have been played by Salvador Dali himself. And Dali was gonna get some really exorbitant pay, like $100,000 per minute he was on screen, and he only would have been in the movie for, I guess, 5 minutes, at least in the script that Jodorowsky had. And the one that really gets me is we almost had a Baron Harkonnen played by the late great Orson Welles. Like, talk about perfect casting. And in the '70s, I mean, it really, man, that would have worked. Um, I believe it was Salvador Dali's muse, and I'm blanking on her name. Forgive me. Would have played Emperor Shaddam IV's daughter. Just really interesting. She was a beautiful woman. I believe she was a model, and again, she was Dali's muse. But absolutely gorgeous woman. But the thought and just the planning that went into it really would have been Jodorowsky's truly Jodorowsky's Dune. He had changed a few things. The ending was probably the biggest departure from what we've seen in all of the films thus far. Not that we've seen the end of Villeneuve's trilogy of films yet, but the ending, I don't know. I think it's cool. I think he's kind of pulling a Kubrick, what Kubrick did with The Shining. Quite a departure from the original ending, but I probably could have lived with it. I like what he was trying to do with it, and I won't spoil it so that you guys can watch Jodorowsky's Dune, this documentary on Max. But just the level of detail. I mean, he was involved in. I mean, he was picking everybody to make specific designs just for particular characters and corners of the Dune universe. Literally just going person by person, actor by actor, to assemble what would have been a killer cast. And again, the detail and the time he took with illustrators Mobius and Chris Foss in developing these really wild looking ships. And Chris Foss, he developed the among the ships and different things that he developed, the design for the Emperor's Palace. Wild and apparently completely buildable. He had designed it in a way that it was obviously a super unorthodox, very sci-fi, ultra unique design, but he had studied to be an architect. And me as a Chicago guy in architecture, I perked up immediately. And just the fact that he designed it in a way that it was absolutely buildable and stable, I thought was really cool. Because in those days, you had, whether you were building a miniature or you're building a large, set piece, they had to deal in so much more practical effects and sets in those days because they didn't have the level of computer effects. They had some. And speaking of computer effects, I think it was they originally Jodorowsky approached Douglas Trumbull of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and then later of Blade Runner, as we all know. That didn't quite work out. they, kind of clashed. Jodorowsky felt that he wasn't a good fit, so he ended up connecting with Dan O'Bannon, the great Dan O'Bannon, who we all know would go on to write Alien, and he would collaborate with H.R. Giger on that, and just the plans that they had, what they were going to do in terms of special effects, really would have pushed the envelope, similar in a way that Kubrick did for 2001: A Space Odyssey, in which Kubrick literally invented cameras and techniques to pull that movie off, which is so commendable. Again, 2001 is up there in terms of at least my top 3, top 5 films of all time. So to hear all of this, O'Bannon, Mobius, all these incredible creators, the cast of Orson Welles and Mick Jagger and David Carradine, just really the mind reels. One other thing that was very cool about this documentary, they interview another one of my favorite directors, and a guy that I briefly met, of all places, in an Italian disco in downtown LA on my birthday, a year or two ago. The great Nicholas Winding Refn is interviewed in the documentary. He actually had a chance to, because he's a big Jodorowsky fan, and he was hanging out in Paris, and Jodorowsky showed him, there's this super thick, I guess, sort of what do they call those? Not a picture book, but basically a full, basically the entire full film. All the scenes sort of sketched out in a super thick book of all 90 scenes that would have been his film. And Refn got a chance to sit with him, and Jodorowsky went scene by scene, page by page of this thick tome that they had assembled that would have been basically the Bible for producing this film. And Refn said quite gleefully and relishing the fact that he might be the only person alive who has technically seen Jodorowsky's Dune, because he had the man himself literally walking him through the entire lookbook, scene by scene by scene, all the way through to the end. And that's amazing. I have obviously a huge amount of respect for Jodorowsky, but I also really love Refn, because again, his film Drive is up there, probably one of my top 5 films ever. I would say probably in my top 10. So is Only God Forgives. We really need Refn back in the director's chair for a film. He's done a couple TV shows, one for Netflix, Copenhagen Cowboy. He did one for Amazon Prime, Too Old to Die Young, both of which, again, if you're a cinephile like me, both really fun, really interesting. But man, I feel like I'm owed 3 films from Refn. Obviously, he should do whatever he wants to do. But when I briefly spoke with Refn at that Italian disco in downtown LA a year or so ago, I told him, I said, hey, I kind of dig what you're doing with Copenhagen Cowboy on Netflix. Will there be more seasons? He said, probably not. And I said, so, what's the plan? He's like, probably going to do a film next. I'm like, that sounds right. So for a while, it looked like Refn was going to be doing a film of, or maybe it was a series. I think it was a film of the cult classic movie trilogy Maniac Cop. Huge fan of that from the late 80s, early 90s. And I was thrilled that he, I guess, had gotten the rights to it and was working with the great writer and comic book writer Ed Brubaker on it. Nothing happened. We had all the other stuff going on in 2020 with, police brutality. And so I think it was just kind of shelved, and they didn't want to do anything in bad taste. But I hope he revisits it one day. But I'm deep in the weeds now. So yeah, Nicholas Winding Refn, the great director, really is the only one on the planet who technically has seen Jodorowsky's Dune. And you lucky motherfucker. That's awesome. And Refn, again, he marches to the beat of his own drum. If he wanted to, he could be as mainstream as he wants, but he really stays true to his particular quirks and idiosyncrasies as a writer and a filmmaker, which I really have mad respect for. And that's Jodorowsky too. He does a particular thing. Yeah, it's surrealist, but I think that's kind of fun. I think part of the fun of a filmmaker like Jodorowsky, and Dune probably would have been his most, it would have been his most mainstream film if that had been produced. But it was so ahead of its time. The things he was trying to get across with, uh, you know, expanding human consciousness, all these themes that have always been there in the Dune novel and that we've now seen on screen with the Dune movies. And Hollywood just wasn't there. They loved the lookbook. They loved the creativity and the uniqueness of it, the organization of it, but they didn't. They were really uncomfortable with Jodorowsky because he was so out there, and that really breaks my heart. One of the things he talks about is how he sort of has carried that in his heart of they probably would have made it if it would have been somebody other than him, but then it wouldn't have been Jodorowsky's Dune. It would have been somebody else's, designed by Jodorowsky, but basically he picks all the ingredients, he sets it up, but somebody else cooks and assembles the meal, and that it wouldn't have been his. The silver lining to all of that, this unrealized what probably would have been a masterpiece. And there is an AI trailer of Jodorowsky's Dune on YouTube. I highly recommend checking out. I wish they would have fed in the actors that he had in mind. So maybe if there's somebody out there, some AI wizard that wants to plug Mick Jagger and David Carradine and Orson Welles into Jodorowsky's Dune, do another AI trailer, please do it. It looks really cool, and could probably be done even better than what they have up there. Jodorowsky's silver lining was that his connecting and building such a strong bond with French comic French comic artist Mobius resulted in their making comics and their the Incal and a few others, and so much of what Jodorowsky and Mobius and even Chris Voss had developed for the Dune film that was unrealized, so much of that made it into their comics that they did. And so I think that's really cool that even though there's technically that loss, for perceived loss, for Jodorowsky not getting a chance to make his Dune, he still managed to take all those relationships with these other great creators and still create something that's uniquely his and that no one can ever take away from him in the form of these comics and these graphic novels. I just think that's so awesome that he was still able to do that. And I really need to read these comics and these graphic novels that he came up with, because just the frames that we see in the documentary just look fantastic. And Mobius, if you're, I'm a comic nerd back in the day. Everyone knows who he is. He's just an absolute genius working with another absolute genius in Jodorowsky. Just, man, I've got to drop some coin and read these. But yeah, there was a silver lining of that collaboration. They also make a point, and again, not to spoil it, and it's not a major spoiler, of how his lookbooks, without a doubt, made the rounds in Hollywood, because you can look at so many frames and so many sketches in his lookbook that ended up showing up in movies like Star Wars, Masters of the Universe, Raiders of the Lost Ark, just certain sketches and certain points of view, camera views and compositions that would show up. You could tell that these other directors, these other creators appreciated what he had created and what he had developed. And, again, you steal from the best as a filmmaker. Not always, but sometimes, just something's cool, and you can kind of put your own spin on it and put it in your film. And that's a high form of praise, I think. And yeah, this was a fun documentary of what could have been, but not completely tragic, in that this collaboration, this great hope, and all of this hard work, while it did not result in the end film, it did result in more completely creator-owned, independent creativity and production for Jodorowsky, for Mobius, and ultimately for all of us. Again, the end of the documentary really shows us just how influential this lookbook and the ideas and concepts, how It's in so many other films, like just little pieces and bits, and that's one of the true measures of a great artist. You know, we emulate our favorites, we emulate the greats. We want to learn from them, and Jodorowsky is truly one of the greats, as is Mobius, and what they had created here echoes still to today. And I think that that is just really, really cool. If you're somebody who's ever strived for something and fallen short, if you're a creative person in any way, this is worth your time. Or if you're just somebody who just loves a great story and loves to see somebody strive and see someone who really is outside of the mainstream, while he misses trying to do something within the mainstream, ultimately still wins out doing what he does best and staying true to himself and his own creative vision. So Jodorowsky's doing it, worth your time. And thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this, please like, please subscribe. Mention in the comments below if there's other movies, documentaries, and things we should check out. But yeah, next few episodes, we're going to go over as much Dune content and all the Dune films. So yeah, stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.